Tiny silver dime could be hiding a massive story. 4 Mercury dimes stand out from the crowd, with exceptional specimens bringing serious auction attention and top examples reaching into the thousands of dollars. From rare dates to extraordinary condition and scarce mint varieties, these 4 coins are the ones every collector should know. Stay locked on ARY Coins News, because one overlooked Mercury dime could surprise you. Let's get started. Step 1. Stop scrolling for a moment, because an old dime hiding in a collection, inherited coin box, dealer tray, or forgotten family envelope can sometimes carry a story that is far bigger than its 10-cent face value. Today, we are going back more than a century to one of the most recognizable American silver coins ever produced, the 1917 Mercury dime. At first glance, it may look like nothing more than an old 10-cent piece, but collectors know that the date, mint mark, strike quality, surface preservation, eye appeal, and unusual mint characteristics can completely change the way this coin is judged. The biggest mistake is assuming that every 1917 Mercury dime is rare simply because it is old. Age alone does not create a major market price. What makes a particular example exciting is the combination of scarcity, condition, originality, demand, and documented authentication. And that is exactly what we are going to investigate today, because the 1917 issue has several details that deserve much closer attention than a quick glance can reveal. The story begins during the First World War era, when the United States was experiencing enormous economic and industrial change. The Mercury dime had been introduced only a few years earlier, in 1916, after replacing the barber dime design that had circulated since the 19th century. The new dime was designed by Adolf A. Weinman, and its obverse became famous for the portrait that generations of Americans later nicknamed the Mercury design. Technically, however, the figure is generally understood to represent liberty wearing a winged cap, an artistic symbol associated with freedom of thought. On the reverse, a bundle of rods known as fasces appears alongside an olive branch, creating a powerful combination of authority and peace. The coin was struck in 90% silver and 10% copper, with a total weight of about 2.5 grams. Its silver composition is one reason these coins remain interesting to collectors, even when an individual example is not especially scarce. Now comes the first important surprise about 1917. This is not the same rarity category as the famous 1916D Mercury dime. The 1916D is the legendary key date of the series because the Denver Mint produced only a very small number before the design changed in the following years. The 1917 Philadelphia issue, by comparison, had a much larger production figure, with approximately 55.23 million pieces struck. That means an ordinary circulated 1917 Philadelphia dime should not automatically be described as a rare jackpot coin. But this is where serious collecting becomes much more interesting. A coin can have a substantial original mintage and still become difficult to locate in exceptionally preserved condition. Coins spent decades moving through pockets, cash registers, banks, drawers, and collections naturally picked up scratches, wear, dents, discoloration, and other damage. A sharply preserved survivor can therefore become much more desirable than its original production number might suggest. The mint mark is one of the first things I would tell any collector to inspect. On a 1917 Mercury dime, the absence or presence of a mint mark helps identify where the coin was produced. Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark, while Denver and San Francisco issues used their respective mint identifiers. The 1917D production was dramatically smaller than Philadelphia, with roughly 765,400 pieces struck, while the San Francisco issue had a production of about 5.55 million. Those numbers immediately explain why the three versions should not be treated as identical coins. A 1917D in a strong grade can attract substantially more attention than an ordinary Philadelphia example, while a well-preserved 1917S can also be desirable. If you have a 1917 dime, do not clean it, polish it, scrape it, or attempt to improve the surface. Collectors generally prefer original surfaces, and aggressive cleaning can permanently reduce the coin's appeal. Condition is where the conversation becomes much more serious. When someone says they have a 1917 Mercury dime in excellent condition, that description is not enough for an accurate market assessment. Coin grading uses standardized categories, and professional grading services examine wear, luster, strike, marks, surface quality, color, originality, and other characteristics. A circulated coin can still be attractive, but a coin retaining strong original detail can move into a very different collector category. On the Mercury dime, look closely at the high points of Liberty's hair and cap, the facial and cheek areas, the wing details, and the reverse design, where first appears on raised portions, so comparing the sharpness of these areas can help a collector understand whether the coin has merely been described as nice or actually has significant remaining detail. Remember, though, visual inspection is only a preliminary step and cannot replace professional grading. There is another major factor that collectors sometimes overlook: strike quality. Two coins with the same date and mint mark can look surprisingly different because one may have been struck more sharply than the other. The Mercury dime design contains numerous fine details, particularly around the winged cap, hair, bands, and reverse elements. A weak strike can make certain details appear soft, even when the coin has not necessarily experienced extensive circulation. That is why an experienced collector does not judge grade from a single feature. The entire coin must be examined under appropriate lighting and magnification. Strong luster, clean fields, sharp lettering, and well-defined design elements can make a coin much more appealing. A premium example is not simply old and shiny. It needs the right combination of preservation and technical quality. The next subject is mint errors, and this is where caution becomes absolutely essential. Internet coin discussions often turn ordinary marks, scratches, machine damage, die deterioration, or post-mint accidents into supposed errors. A genuine mint error is something that occurred during the manufacturing process, not something that happened to the coin decades later in circulation. Possible error categories can include off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck-through errors, die-related abnormalities, and other production mistakes. But the mere presence of an unusual feature does not prove that an error exists. For example, a crescent-shaped missing section might be a genuine clipped planchet, but it could also be damage created after the coin left the mint. Likewise, unusual lettering might appear dramatic under magnification without representing a recognized double die variety. One of the most important checks is determining whether the unusual feature is actually part of the original minting process. A genuine off-center strike usually has a recognizable relationship between the design and the coin's edge, while a post-mint damaged coin may show deformation that does not fit a normal striking event. With a clipped planchet, the shape and characteristics of the missing metal can provide important clues. With a struck-through error, foreign material may have interfered with the dies during striking and left an unusual impression. Die cracks can create raised lines because the die itself developed a fracture. These differences matter because collectors and specialists do not simply pay for something that looks weird. They pay attention to whether the feature has a logical manufacturing explanation and whether specialists can authenticate it. Variety hunting is another fascinating area surrounding the 1917 Mercury dime. A variety is different from a random damaged coin. Varieties can result from characteristics associated with the dies used to strike coins, including doubled elements or other recurring die features. If you discover something unusual around the date, lettering, stars, or design elements, compare it carefully with recognized references rather than immediately assuming it is a major doubled die. Machine doubling can sometimes create flat, shelf-like secondary impressions that look exciting under magnification, but are not equivalent to a dramatic hub doubling variety. The distinction can be extremely important. If your coin appears to show a potentially significant variety, photographs taken under different lighting angles can help during preliminary research, but professional attribution is the safer route before assigning a major market claim. And now we reach the subject that gets collectors excited: market price. A 1917 Mercury dime does not have one universal price in 2026. There is no legitimate single number that can be assigned to every example. A circulated Philadelphia coin, a better preserved Denver piece, a high-grade certified example, and a genuinely authenticated mint error can occupy completely different market levels. Auction results also change according to grade, certification, appeal, rarity, collector demand, auction venue, timing, and whether several bidders compete aggressively for the same coin. A coin that sells strongly in one auction does not mean every similar-looking example will produce the same result. Anyone claiming that every 1917 Mercury dime is automatically worth thousands or millions of dollars is ignoring the fundamentals of numismatics. For a collector evaluating a possible high-value 1917 example, certification can become extremely important. Professional grading companies examine coins, assign grades, and encapsulate qualifying pieces. Certification does not magically make a common coin rare, but it can provide an independent assessment of authenticity and condition. This becomes especially important when a coin appears to have a major error, an unusual variety, or an exceptionally high grade. A raw coin described online as mint condition is not automatically equivalent to a professionally graded coin. Even small differences in surface preservation can influence the grade. Collectors should also verify certification information through the grading company's own resources when possible, because counterfeit holders and altered coins exist in the marketplace. There is a fascinating historical reason the Mercury dime remains popular today. These coins were not created as commemorative pieces intended to sit safely inside display cases. They were everyday money. People used them to buy ordinary goods and services during an era when 10 cents had meaningful purchasing power. That means every surviving specimen carries a physical connection to American life during the 1910s. Imagine the number of transactions that could have involved a single dime before it eventually entered a collection. A 1917 coin could have passed through countless hands during a period of war, technological expansion, changing transportation, and major social transformation. That historical connection adds an emotional dimension to collecting that cannot be measured by a price guide alone. The silver content is another reason these coins continue to attract attention. Because the Mercury dime contains 90% silver, even a common circulated example has a precious metal component that distinguishes it from modern base metal dimes. However, collectors should not confuse silver value with numismatic market value. The metal content provides one baseline consideration, while rarity, grade, date, mint mark errors, and collector demand can push a coin into a different category. A worn 1917 dime and a superbly preserved certified specimen may contain essentially the same amount of silver, yet their collector markets can be dramatically different. This is one of the most important lessons for anyone entering old coin collecting. Composition matters, but it is only one part of the story. Another mistake is cleaning. If your 1917 Mercury dime has dark areas, natural tunning, or uneven coloration, do not immediately reach for household chemicals, silver polish, abrasive cloths, toothpaste, or other cleaning methods. What looks like dirt to an inexperienced owner may actually be original tunning or surface character that collectors consider desirable. Cleaning can leave hairlines, unnatural brightness, or other evidence that the coin has been chemically or mechanically altered. Once those marks are present, they generally cannot simply be erased. If you believe you have an important coin, preserving it in its current state is usually far wiser than attempting a home makeover. Handle it carefully by the edges and avoid touching the surfaces unnecessarily. Suppose you discover a 1917 Mercury dime with an unusual date, strange edge, apparent doubling, or a section that seems to be missing. What should you do? First, resist the temptation to announce a giant price online. Examine both sides carefully, check the edge, record the weight with an accurate scale, and compare the dimensions with known specifications. Look for signs of damage, alteration, tooling, or environmental exposure. Next, obtain clear photographs under neutral lighting from multiple angles. If the coin still appears unusual after careful examination, consider having it evaluated by a reputable numismatic professional or recognized authentication and grading service. The purpose of this process is not simply to chase a bigger price. It is to determine what the coin actually is before making a financial decision. Weight and dimensions can be useful screening tools, but they are not absolute proof of authenticity or an error. A normal 1917 Mercury dime should have the expected specifications for its type, and a significant difference may deserve further investigation. But scales can be inaccurate, surfaces can be worn, and environmental effects can influence measurements. Counterfeiters can also manipulate genuine coins, so a correct weight alone does not establish authenticity. The edge should be examined as well, especially if the coin appears suspicious. Experienced collectors consider the entire physical profile of a coin, including lettering, design style, metal characteristics, surfaces, and strike. When a coin appears to be extraordinary, the more extraordinary the claim, the stronger the evidence should be. The 1917 D deserves special attention because its lower production makes it a much more interesting target for Mercury dime specialists than a typical Philadelphia example. But even here, collectors should not confuse scarcity with guaranteed riches. A heavily worn example and a sharply preserved example are not interchangeable. The same principle applies to the 1917 S. The mint mark can dramatically change the identity of the coin, but the final market assessment still depends on condition and authenticity. When examining the mint mark area, use magnification carefully and look for signs that the mark itself has been altered. Altered mint marks are a serious concern in classic US coin collecting because changing a more common coin into a scarcer date or mint can create a misleading appearance. The auction world adds another layer to the story. When a certified 1917 Mercury dime reaches a major numismatic auction, bidders are not simply buying 10 cents of face value or a small amount of silver. They are bidding on a specific combination of date, mint mark, grade, surfaces, strike, provenance, when documented, and collector demand. Exceptional coins can command strong premiums because registry set collectors and specialists may compete for pieces that fit very narrow requirements. But auction prices should always be interpreted carefully. The final hammer amount may not represent the same amount a private seller receives, and buyers' premiums or other auction terms can affect the total paid. A headline about a dramatic sale should therefore never be used as a promise about what an ungraded coin sitting in a drawer will bring. And here is the biggest takeaway from the 1917 Mercury dime story. Never judge an old coin only by the number printed on its face. 10 cents may be stamped into the design, but the collecting world operates on a much more complicated scale. Historical importance, silver composition, surviving population, mint production, condition rarity, varieties, errors, authentication, and collector demand all interact. The 1917 issue is especially interesting because it sits at the beginning of a long and beloved Mercury dime series while offering multiple mint mark possibilities and a wide range of conditions. Some examples are ordinary circulated survivors, while exceptional specimens can attract serious specialist attention. That contrast is exactly what makes searching old American coins so fascinating. If you enjoyed this deep investigation into the 1917 Mercury dime, stay with us because the next coin in your collection might have a story you never expected. Remember, not every old coin is a jackpot, and not every unusual mark is a mint error, but every genuine discovery begins with careful observation. Before you spend, sell, clean, or alter an old US coin, learn exactly what you have. Subscribe to ARY Coins News for fresh collector alerts, historic American coin stories, market watch discussions, error coin investigations, and new discoveries from the world of numismatics. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next coin mystery, because the smallest piece of change can sometimes lead to the biggest collecting story. Step 2. Tonight, we are opening the case on the 1936 Mercury dime, a silver 10-cent piece that entered circulation during one of the most dramatic periods in American history. This is not a story about simply finding an old coin and assuming it must be worth a fortune. This is a story about knowing exactly what you are looking at. The 1936 Mercury dime belongs to the later years of one of America's most admired coin designs, and examples can range from heavily circulated pieces with obvious wear to sharply preserved specimens that attract serious attention from collectors. The real mystery begins when you place three things together: the 1936 date, the mint mark, and the condition. Add a genuine mint-made error, an important die variety, or an exceptionally high certified grade, and suddenly the conversation can become much more interesting. So before you dismiss that old dime as just another piece of silver, look closely, because today we are examining the history, production, condition, errors, varieties, authentication clues, and modern collector market factors surrounding the 1936 Mercury dime. The year 1936 places this coin in an important chapter of the Mercury dime story. The United States was moving through the difficult years following the Great Depression, and American commerce was gradually recovering from the economic crisis that had transformed everyday life. Franklin D. Roosevelt was president, industrial activity was changing, and ordinary Americans continued using small denomination coins for everyday purchases. The Mercury dime had already been circulating for 2 decades by this point. It had first appeared in 1916, replacing the barber dime, and its distinctive design had become familiar throughout the country. Adolph A. Weinman created the design, with Liberty wearing a winged cap on the obverse and a fasces combined with an olive branch on the reverse. Although generations of people called it the Mercury dime, the obverse figure was intended as Liberty rather than the Roman god Mercury. That distinction is important because the coin is really an artistic representation of American ideals, and its symbolism helped make the design one of the most memorable issues in U.S. coinage. Now let us move directly into the metal, because the composition of the 1936 Mercury dime explains why these coins remain important to collectors even when they are heavily circulated. The standard Mercury dime was struck in an alloy consisting of 90% silver and 10% copper, with a weight of approximately 2.5 grams and a diameter of about 17.9 millimeters. Its reeded edge was designed with a series of grooves around the circumference, giving the coin the familiar appearance associated with classic U.S. silver dimes. The silver content means a 1936 Mercury dime is fundamentally different from the ordinary copper-nickel dimes Americans use today. But remember one crucial point: silver content and collector interest are not the same thing. The metal gives the coin an intrinsic component, while its numismatic significance depends on factors such as date, mint mark, preservation, strike, originality, rarity, and demand. That is why 2 1936 Mercury dimes can look similar to an inexperienced observer while having very different positions in the collecting market. The first detail I would inspect is the mint mark, because 1936 was not a one-mint story. Mercury dimes dated 1936 were struck at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. A Philadelphia example normally has no mint mark, while Denver and San Francisco pieces carry their respective mint identifiers. The production numbers were not identical, and that matters when collectors compare surviving examples. Philadelphia produced a very large quantity of 1936 dimes, while Denver and San Francisco produced smaller amounts. But mintage alone does not tell the entire story. Millions of coins can disappear from the collecting population through wear, melting, damage, or simple loss, while high-grade survivors can become much harder to locate. This is why advanced collectors often talk about condition rarity. A date may have had a large original production, but still be difficult to find with exceptional luster, sharp detail, clean surfaces, and a strong strike. If you find a 1936 dime, identifying the mint mark should therefore be one of your first steps before thinking about price. The 1936 Philadelphia issue is especially interesting because its large production figure means an ordinary circulated example is not automatically a scarce coin. That is an important reality check for anyone watching sensational coin videos online. An old date does not automatically mean a huge price. The 1936 Philadelphia dime can be found in circulated grades, and many surviving examples show the normal evidence of decades of use. You may see flattened high points, scratches, contact marks, darkened areas, or signs of cleaning, yet the situation changes as the grade rises. A coin that survived nearly a century with minimal circulation, strong luster, attractive surfaces, and impressive detail is a very different collectible object. In the upper grades, collectors become increasingly selective. Small marks that would barely matter on a circulated coin can become significant when evaluating an advanced mint state specimen. That is why condition is not a side issue on a 1936 Mercury dime. It is one of the central parts of the entire market story. Now look at the Denver issue. The 1936 D Mercury dime was produced at the Denver Mint and carries the small d mint mark, identifying its origin. Denver coins can be particularly interesting to collectors because mint-marked issues are evaluated separately from Philadelphia examples. But again, never assume that a D automatically means a fortune. A circulated 1936 D and an exceptionally preserved 1936 D occupy different collecting categories. On the best examples, collectors study the amount of original mint luster, the sharpness of the design, the presence of contact marks, and the overall visual quality. The reverse bands are particularly important when discussing strike quality on Mercury dimes. The fasces contains bands and other fine details that can become weak or incomplete because of striking characteristics or wear. A strong strike can therefore make a substantial difference in the visual appeal of an otherwise similar coin. For someone searching through a collection, the mint mark should be documented before any attempt is made to estimate the coin's market position. Then there is the 1936 S, struck at the San Francisco Mint. San Francisco Mercury dimes are another area where condition and strike can become especially important. When looking at an S-mint example, do not simply ask whether the coin is old or shiny. Ask whether the surfaces appear original, whether the high points retain detail, whether the fields are relatively clean, and whether the reverse features are strongly defined. A bright appearance can sometimes be misleading because a coin may have been cleaned, polished, or chemically treated. Original mint luster has a different visual character from artificial brightness. Collectors with experience learn to recognize this distinction, but beginners should not feel pressured to make a final judgment from one photograph. A professional examination can be worthwhile if the coin appears to have unusual preservation. The strongest examples of a common date coin can become much more interesting when they enter the higher levels of certified grading, where collectors compete for quality rather than simply for the date. Here is where the words good condition and excellent condition need careful explanation. These descriptions are common in everyday conversations, but professional numismatics uses standardized grading terminology. A coin described casually as excellent may actually fall into a circulated grade, an about uncirculated category, or perhaps an uncirculated category depending on its physical characteristics. The correct grade cannot be established from the date alone. On a 1936 Mercury dime, examine Liberty's hair, the winged cap, the cheek, and the highest portions of the design. On the reverse, study the fasces, bands, lettering, and olive branch, where removes detail gradually, while marks from contact with other coins can affect the appearance of a piece that otherwise has little wear. A coin can have beautiful detail but distracting scratches, or strong luster but noticeable marks. Professional grading considers the whole coin, which is why an honest assessment is much more useful than simply calling an old dime mint condition. The strike deserves its own investigation because Mercury dimes can reveal fascinating differences even when they carry exactly the same date and mint mark. The coin was produced by striking prepared planchets between dies, and the force, die condition, planchet characteristics, and other production factors could influence how sharply the design appeared. If the central details are weak, that does not automatically mean the coin is heavily worn. Some softness can originate from the strike itself. This is why collectors compare multiple areas rather than relying on one feature. The wing on Liberty's cap, the hair details, the reverse bands, and the central elements of the fasces can all provide clues. Strong definition can increase eye appeal, especially when combined with original surfaces. On a coin approaching the higher grades, strike quality becomes part of the story that separates an ordinary survivor from a specimen that advanced collectors might actively seek. Now we reach the subject that creates the most excitement in coin hunting videos: mint errors. A genuine 1936 Mercury dime error could be substantially more interesting than a normal example, but identifying an authentic error requires discipline. A mint error must originate during the manufacturing process at the mint. It is not simply damage that occurred after the coin entered circulation. Potential categories include off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck-through errors, die cracks, and other production abnormalities. The exact appearance of each error can vary, and not every unusual-looking coin qualifies. A scratch across the date, a flattened rim from a hard impact, a gouge in the surface, or a bent edge may have happened long after the coin left the mint. This distinction is critical. Before attaching a major price expectation to a strange-looking 1936 dime, the feature needs to be examined in context, and when significant, authenticated by an experienced numismatic professional. Consider an apparent double date. Under magnification, you might notice what looks like a second outline around one or more digits. That can be exciting, but it is not automatically a major double die variety. True hub doubling and other recognized varieties have specific characteristics, while mechanical or machine doubling can produce flatter secondary impressions that may look dramatic to a beginner. Die deterioration can also create unusual shapes around letters and numbers. The correct approach is comparison and attribution. If the same unusual feature repeatedly appears on coins struck from a particular die, it may have significance as a recognized variety. If it appears randomly on one damaged coin, the explanation could be completely different. Never enlarge a photograph and assume every shadow is doubling. Lighting angle, camera processing, scratches, and circulation damage can all create misleading appearances. A clipped planchet is another error that can attract attention. During normal coin production, metal blanks are prepared from sheets, and an abnormal cutting event can sometimes result in a planchet with an incomplete edge. A genuine clip usually has characteristics that reflect the way the metal was removed before striking. The edge and surrounding design can provide important clues, but once again, post-mint damage can imitate an error. A coin that has been physically struck, cut, or damaged after leaving the mint can develop an irregular shape that looks dramatic in photographs. This is why serious collectors look for the relationship between the missing area, the rim, the design, and the metal flow. A genuine mint error has a manufacturing story written into its physical characteristics. Authentication turns an exciting possibility into an evidence-based conclusion. A coin can become bent, damaged, or distorted through decades of circulation. Look for evidence of how the metal moved during the striking process. When the design, rim, and edge all tell a coherent minting story, the case becomes stronger. When they do not, caution is necessary. This is why authentication remains essential whenever an unusual 1936 dime appears to show a major production error. Another possibility is a struck-through error, where foreign material or debris interferes between the die and the planchet during striking. This can leave a missing or distorted portion of the design. The appearance can range from subtle to dramatic. However, environmental damage can sometimes create similar-looking depressions or discoloration. The difference is not always obvious from a casual photograph. Professional examination can determine whether the surface characteristics are consistent with a striking event. Die cracks and die breaks provide another category. Because dies experience tremendous pressure during production, they can develop cracks or failures. A die crack usually appears as a raised line on the struck coin because the crack exists below the surface of the die. A scratch created after production, by contrast, generally cuts into or across the coin. That raised versus incused distinction can provide a useful first clue, although it is not by itself a complete authentication. The market side of the 1936 Mercury dime is where expectations need to be separated from internet hype. There is no single 2026 price that applies to every 1936 Mercury dime. A heavily circulated Philadelphia example can occupy a completely different price range from a high-grade certified Denver or San Francisco example. A coin with a genuine major mint error is another category entirely. An exceptionally high-grade coin may attract advanced collectors because condition rarity can become more important as the grade increases. Auction competition can also produce different outcomes depending on the venue, the certification, the coin's appearance, and the number of bidders interested in that particular piece. Therefore, an auction headline should never be interpreted as a guarantee for every coin with the same date. The strongest market evidence comes from comparable coins with matching date, mint mark, grade, and relevant attributes. There is also a historical dimension that cannot be captured by a price tag. A 1936 Mercury dime is a physical survivor from an America that looked completely different from the world we know today. It circulated when transportation, communications, entertainment, manufacturing, and daily commerce were evolving rapidly. It passed through an economy still recovering from the Great Depression, and it belonged to a generation that would soon experience another enormous transformation as the United States approached the Second World War. When you hold one of these coins, you are not simply holding silver. You are holding an object that was designed, manufactured, distributed, spent, saved, and eventually preserved by people living nearly 90 years ago. For many collectors, that historical connection is just as important as the potential financial side of the hobby. If you think you have an exceptional 1936 Mercury dime, the safest strategy is simple. Preserve first, investigate second, sell last. Do not polish the coin. Do not scrape dark areas. Do not attempt to straighten a bent piece. Do not drill it, mount it, or apply household chemicals. Hold the coin by its edges and place it somewhere that will protect the surfaces from unnecessary contact. Photograph both sides and the edge. Record the mint mark and any unusual characteristics. If you suspect an error, photograph the feature from several angles rather than relying on one close-up. If the coin appears to be a high-grade specimen or a significant error, professional authentication and grading can provide much stronger evidence than an online opinion. The goal is to protect the coin while establishing exactly what you own. So what should a collector remember when the words 1936 Mercury dime appear on an old coin? Remember that the date is only the beginning. Determine whether the coin is Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. Study its actual condition rather than relying on descriptions such as excellent. Examine the strike, especially the important details of the design. Look for original surfaces and avoid cleaning. Investigate unusual features carefully, but never label damage as a mint error without evidence. Compare possible varieties using established numismatic references and seek professional attribution when a feature appears significant. Then, and only then, consider the market. This approach protects you from sensational claims while giving you a much better chance of recognizing a genuinely important coin when one appears. And now the final question: could a 1936 Mercury dime become a major collector piece in the modern market? The answer depends entirely on which 1936 dime you have. An ordinary circulated example should not be presented as a guaranteed jackpot, but a scarce mint-marked coin in exceptional preservation, an unusually high-grade certified survivor, or a properly authenticated mint error can be a very different story. The strongest coins are judged individually, and their market performance depends on documented quality and collector demand. That is why the real treasure hunt is not about believing every dramatic claim. It is about learning enough to recognize the difference between ordinary wear and genuine rarity, between damage and a mint-made error, and between an asking price and an actual market transaction. If this 1936 Mercury dime investigation opened your eyes to what can be hiding in old collections, stay alert, keep your coins safe, and never underestimate the history sitting inside a small piece of American silver. Step 3. Imagine opening an old coin collection and finding a small silver dime carrying the date 1940 and a tiny letter S beneath the wreath on the reverse. At first, it may look like an ordinary piece of American change, but that little S changes the entire identity of the coin. You are looking at a 1940 S Mercury dime, a coin struck at the San Francisco Mint during an extraordinary period in American history. Nearly 9 decades have passed since this dime entered circulation, and today collectors examine these pieces for much more than their 10-cent denomination. They look at preservation, strike quality, mint luster, surface marks, tunning, die characteristics, possible errors, and especially the condition of the coin. A worn example and a sharply preserved mint state example can occupy completely different places in the collector market. That is why today's investigation is not about claiming that every 1940 S dime is a fortune. It is about understanding what makes one example ordinary, another desirable, and an exceptional certified specimen capable of attracting serious attention from advanced Mercury dime collectors. The story of the 1940s begins during a fascinating chapter of United States history. America was still officially at peace when this coin was struck, but the world around the country was rapidly changing as the Second World War spread across Europe and Asia. Franklin D. Roosevelt was president, American factories were expanding, and the nation was moving toward an era that would transform its economy and society. The Mercury dime itself was already a familiar part of American commerce. First introduced in 1916, the design had replaced the barber dime and quickly became one of the most recognizable silver coins of the 20th century. Adolph A. Weinman created the design, featuring Liberty wearing a winged cap on the obverse. The reverse shows a fasces beside an olive branch, symbolizing strength and peace. Despite its popular nickname, the portrait is intended to represent liberty rather than the Roman god Mercury. Every 1940s dime, therefore, carries both a numismatic identity and a direct connection to the final years before America entered World War I. Now focus on the letter that makes today's coin different, the S mint mark. The 1940 S was produced at the San Francisco Mint, and that small mint mark appears on the reverse near the bottom of the design. This is the first detail every owner should verify before thinking about a price. 1940 Mercury dime without a mint mark is a Philadelphia issue, while a D indicates Denver and an S identifies San Francisco. These are separate collecting entries even though the basic design is identical. The 1940 S is not the same coin as a 1940 Philadelphia or 1940 D issue, and collectors evaluate each separately. Production numbers, surviving populations, grade distribution, strike quality, and demand all contribute to the market. This is why simply saying, "I have a 1940 Mercury dime" is not enough. The mint mark gives the coin a more precise identity, and once that identity is established, the next question becomes much more important. Exactly how well has this particular 1940 S survived? The metal inside the coin is another part of its historical character. Like other Mercury dimes of this era, the 1940 S was struck in a composition of 90% silver and 10% copper. The standard weight is approximately 2.7 grams, and the diameter is about 17.9 millimeters. Its edge is reeded, with the familiar grooves found on classic US silver coinage. This means that a genuine 1940 S Mercury dime has both a precious metal component and a collector identity. However, owners should understand the difference between silver value and numismatic value. The silver content provides a baseline tied to the metal itself, while collector pricing can depend on factors that have nothing to do with the amount of silver in the coin. A circulated dime and a superbly preserved mint state specimen contain essentially the same amount of silver, but their collecting appeal can be dramatically different. The market follows the specific coin, not merely the metal. Now let's talk about condition, because this is where the 1940 S becomes much more interesting. Many people use phrases such as excellent condition, good condition, or mint condition when describing an old coin, but professional grading is much more precise. A Mercury dime can show varying degrees of circulation wear, contact marks, scratches, luster, and remaining detail. On the obverse, collectors examine Liberty's hair, cheek, cap, and wing details. On the reverse, they study the fasces, bands, olive branch, lettering, and surrounding fields. A circulated coin may have obvious flattening on the highest points, while an uncirculated coin can retain original mint luster and show no actual friction from circulation. But even among uncirculated examples, one coin can be dramatically better than another. Marks, strike quality, tunning, and eye appeal all become increasingly important as the grade moves upward. This brings us to the phrase collectors pay especially close attention to: mint state. An MS designation generally indicates that the coin has not experienced circulation wear, but reaching a high MS grade requires much more than simply looking shiny. A coin can be technically uncirculated and still have distracting contact marks, weak details, unattractive surfaces, or other characteristics that limit its grade. A high-grade 1940 S Mercury dime needs to survive almost a century while preserving the characteristics collectors expect from an exceptional specimen. The field should be examined carefully for marks, the design should show strong detail, and the luster should appear natural rather than artificially produced. If a 1940s is described as MS64, MS65, MS66, or higher, the exact certified grade matters enormously. Two coins with the same date and mint mark, but different MS grades, should never be treated as interchangeable pieces. Strike quality is another major subject that can change the way an experienced collector views a Mercury dime. The design contains numerous fine details that must be transferred from the dies to the planchet during striking. If the pressure or other production conditions are not ideal, certain portions can appear softer than expected. That means weak detail does not always equal circulation wear. Collectors learn to distinguish between softness caused by the original strike and flattening caused by years of use. The reverse bands are especially interesting because strong definition can contribute significantly to the appearance of a Mercury dime. On a high-grade example, specialists may pay close attention to the bands and other central reverse details. The same principle applies to Liberty's wing and hair on the obverse. Strong detail combined with clean surfaces can make a coin much more impressive than a technically similar example with weaker definition. There is a common mistake that can destroy the very quality a collector hopes to preserve: cleaning. If you discover a 1940s Mercury dime with dark tunning, gray surfaces, brownish areas, or uneven coloration, do not assume that it needs to be polished. Original tunning can develop naturally over many decades, and collectors often distinguish between natural surfaces and coins that have been chemically or mechanically altered. Silver polish, abrasive cloths, household chemicals, and aggressive rubbing can leave permanent evidence on the surface. A coin that looked old but original can suddenly develop hairlines or an unnatural appearance after cleaning. This is especially important for an MS candidate. The surfaces of a high-grade coin are part of its identity, and unnecessary cleaning can compromise its collector appeal. If you think the coin may have significant potential, preservation should come before experimentation. Now comes the question that can change an ordinary inspection into a serious investigation. Does the 1940s have a genuine mint error? The answer requires evidence. A mint error is created during the manufacturing process, not by an accident that happens decades later in someone's pocket. Possible error categories include off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck-through pieces, die cracks, die breaks, and other production abnormalities. But every one of these possibilities has to be separated from ordinary damage. A scratch is not automatically an error. A bent rim is not automatically an error. A gouge, dent, corrosion spot, or damaged edge is not proof of a mint mistake. Before claiming that a 1940s Mercury dime is an error coin, the unusual feature should be examined for characteristics that are consistent with the striking process. Serious claims require serious evidence. Suppose you notice what appears to be doubling around the date or lettering. This is one of the most common situations where collectors can be misled. Magnification can make almost any irregularity look dramatic, especially when lighting creates shadows along the edges of digits and letters. Genuine double die characteristics have specific forms and are associated with the die itself. Mechanical doubling can produce a flatter secondary impression and may appear impressive without representing the same type of variety. Die deterioration can create additional shapes and distortions as well. The correct approach is not to stare at one photograph and immediately declare a rare double die. Instead, inspect the feature from several angles, compare it with known die characteristics, and seek attribution if the evidence appears significant. A legitimate variety is identified through repeatable characteristics, not excitement alone. An apparent clipped planchet can create another mystery. During the production of coin blanks, metal sheets were punched to create planchets. Under certain abnormal circumstances, a blank could be cut incorrectly, leaving an incomplete section along the edge. If such a planchet was struck, the resulting coin could display an unusual curved or straight missing area, but post-mint damage can imitate this appearance. The edge, rim, and metal flow must therefore be studied carefully. A genuine clip has physical characteristics associated with the blanking process and subsequent strike. If the metal looks crushed, cut, or distorted in a way that suggests later damage, the explanation may be completely different. This is why photographs alone can sometimes be insufficient. When a coin appears to have a significant planchet error, professional examination can provide a much stronger answer than an internet comment or an unverified opinion. Off-center strikes provide another fascinating possibility. If the planchet is not correctly positioned when the dies come together, part of the design can be displaced toward the edge, sometimes leaving an area with little or no design. The amount of displacement can range from minor to dramatic. A significant off-center strike can be immediately noticeable, but even then, authentication remains important. A coin damaged after striking can develop an irregular shape that creates a false impression of a mint error. Look carefully at the rim, the relationship between the design and the edge, and the way the metal appears to have flowed. A true striking error tends to have a coherent manufacturing explanation. If the physical evidence instead suggests impact or deformation after the coin entered circulation, it should not be treated as a genuine mint error. The same caution applies to struck-through errors and die cracks. A struck-through piece occurs when some foreign material or debris interferes with the dies and planchet during striking, leaving an unusual impression or missing detail. The result can be subtle or dramatic. A die crack is different because the die itself develops a crack, which can create a raised line on the finished coin. These characteristics can be fascinating to collectors, but they must be distinguished from scratches and environmental damage. One useful preliminary observation is whether an unusual line appears raised or in cues, although even that clue cannot replace professional attribution. The most convincing errors tell a physical story that fits the coin-making process. If the feature cannot be explained through that process, skepticism is appropriate. Collecting is much safer when curiosity is combined with verification. The market question is where many online coin stories become exaggerated. A 1940s Mercury dime does not have one fixed 2026 market price. The amount someone may pay depends on the exact grade, certification, strike, surfaces, eye appeal, tunning, variety, error status, and demand at the moment of sale. A circulated 1940s should not be compared with a top-grade MS example simply because both carry the same date and mint mark. Similarly, a raw coin that looks impressive in a photograph should not automatically be compared with a professionally certified high-grade piece. When a certified MS coin appears in an auction, bidders are evaluating that particular specimen. Competition may be stronger for an unusually attractive coin, a high grade, a rare die variety, or a documented error. The final auction result belongs to that specific coin and should never be presented as a guaranteed price for every 1940s dime. When discussing MS sales, collectors should also understand why certification matters. Professional grading companies evaluate authenticity and condition and then encapsulate qualifying coins. A certified MS grade creates a standardized reference point that allows buyers and sellers to compare coins more confidently. This does not mean every certified coin will sell for the same amount, within the same numerical grade. One example can have superior eye appeal, stronger strike, cleaner fields, or more attractive tunning than another. Registry collectors and specialists may pay particular attention to those differences. Auction results can therefore vary considerably even among coins carrying similar labels. If you are researching the 2026 market, the most meaningful comparison is not simply 1940s Mercury dime. Instead, look for examples matching the same grade, certification status, and relevant characteristics. The closer the comparison, the more useful the market information becomes. There is another detail that can separate an interesting coin from a potentially exceptional one: originality. Collectors want to know whether the surfaces have remained essentially natural since the coin left circulation, or whether someone has attempted to alter them. Hairlines from polishing, unnatural brightness, harsh chemical treatment, scratches, or other surface problems can affect how a coin is evaluated. This becomes especially important when someone describes a coin as excellent based solely on its appearance. A coin can be bright without being original, and a darker coin can sometimes retain attractive natural surfaces. The safest approach is to avoid making assumptions from color alone. Study the texture, luster, marks, and overall appearance. If the coin appears to have high-grade potential, let an experienced professional determine whether the surfaces support that conclusion. Think about the journey of a single 1940s Mercury dime. It left the San Francisco Mint during a period when America was approaching one of the most consequential moments of of the 20th century. It may have traveled hundreds of miles from its place of manufacture. It could have been spent at a store, carried in a worker's pocket, placed in a cash drawer, deposited at a bank, and eventually forgotten in a jar or collection. Every scratch and every trace of wear potentially tells part of that journey. A heavily circulated coin can therefore have tremendous historical character, even if it does not command a spectacular collector price. Conversely, a nearly untouched example tells a different story. Somehow it avoided decades of ordinary use. That survival itself is part of the fascination behind high-grade collecting. So where does the 1940s Mercury dime stand in the collector world? It is a classic American silver coin with an important historical setting, a recognizable San Francisco mint mark, and a wide range of possibilities depending on condition. Ordinary circulated pieces can be accessible to collectors, while higher-grade examples become increasingly interesting as preservation improves. Exceptional MS specimens may attract competition because high-grade survivors are judged against other coins at the same level. A confirmed mint error or recognized variety can create another layer of collector interest, but only when the characteristic is genuine and properly attributed. The most important lesson is that the coin's date and mint mark open the investigation. They do not finish it. Grade, surfaces, strike, authenticity, and documented characteristics determine where the individual specimen belongs. And here is the final mystery. Could the 1940s Mercury dime in your collection be dramatically more interesting than it first appears? Possibly, but the answer has to come from the coin itself. If you see an unusual mark, investigate it. If you see apparent doubling, study it carefully. If the coin looks nearly untouched, learn how professional MS grading works. If the mint mark appears strange, make sure it has not been altered. If the edge looks abnormal, determine whether the feature could have originated during production. And if the coin appears exceptional, do not rush to sell it based on a sensational online claim. Authentication, certification, and comparable market evidence are far more powerful than a dramatic headline. The smartest collector is not the person who claims the biggest price first. It is the person who can prove exactly why a particular coin deserves attention. Step 4 before you put it back into the box. Stop and look again, because the 1925 Mercury dime belongs to a fascinating period of American coinage when silver money was still part of everyday life, and the United States was entering a completely different era of technology, transportation, entertainment, and commerce. Nearly a century later, collectors continue to examine these little silver pieces for details that cannot be seen from across the room. The date is important, but the date alone does not tell the entire story. The mint mark, grade, strike, surfaces, originality, and any legitimate mint-made abnormalities can completely change the identity and market position of an individual coin. Some 1925 Mercury dimes are heavily worn survivors that can still be historically fascinating, while others have preserved enough detail to attract serious attention from specialists. Today, we are going deeper than the usual coin hunting story to discover what really makes a 1925 Mercury dime interesting in the 2026 collecting market, and what you should examine before believing any dramatic price claim. The 1925 Mercury dime appeared during the Roaring Twenties, a decade associated with rapidly changing American culture. Automobiles were becoming increasingly important, radio was transforming entertainment, motion pictures were growing in popularity, and cities were experiencing major changes in architecture and daily life. Yet ordinary Americans still depended on coins for countless small transactions. A 10-cent piece was real circulating money, not a commemorative object intended to remain untouched in a display case. The Mercury dime design had already been circulating for nearly a decade by 1925. It was introduced in 1916 and was created by sculptor Adolf A. Weinman. The obverse features Liberty wearing a winged cap, while the reverse displays a fasces accompanied by an olive branch. The popular nickname, Mercury, came from the resemblance of the winged cap to imagery associated with the Roman god Mercury, but the official artistic concept represents liberty. That distinction makes the design even more interesting because the coin combines classical imagery with American symbolism. Now look at the metal, because the 1925 Mercury dime belongs to an era when American 10-cent pieces were made from a silver alloy. The coin contains 90% silver and 10% copper and has a standard weight of approximately 2.5 grams with a diameter close to 17.9 millimeters. Its edge is reeded, just as collectors expect from this classic silver series. This composition gives the coin an intrinsic metal component, but collectors should never confuse the silver content with the entire numismatic market. The amount of silver inside a coin does not automatically determine its collector price. A heavily circulated 1925 dime and a superbly preserved mint state example contain essentially the same amount of silver, yet their collector appeal can be dramatically different. The reason is simple. Numismatics places a premium on the specific object, including its rarity, condition, authenticity, appearance, and demand. The silver tells you something about the coin, but it does not tell you everything. The next clue is the mint mark, and this is where your 1925 dime can take one of several different paths. Mercury dimes dated 1925 were produced at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. A Philadelphia coin normally carries no mint mark, while the Denver issue bears a D and the San Francisco issue carries an S. These are not interchangeable varieties in the collecting world. Each mint mark represents a separate production source and a separate entry for collectors building complete Mercury dime sets. The original production figures also differed, which means the surviving population and condition distribution can vary between the issues. When you find a 1925 dime, turn it over and carefully inspect the lower reverse area for the mint mark. Do not use the presence of a mint mark as an automatic indication of a huge price, because rarity depends on several factors. But do make sure you identify it correctly before doing anything else, because a 1925 Philadelphia, 1925D, and 1925S should never be evaluated as though they were the exact same coin. The 1925 Philadelphia issue had a production of roughly 5.85 million pieces, making it a coin with a significant original mintage, but still an important part of the Mercury dime series. A large production number does not mean every surviving coin is easy to find in excellent condition. Nearly 100 years of circulation can be extremely destructive to small silver coins. Think about what happened to these dimes after they left the mint. They could have been carried in pockets with other coins, dropped onto hard surfaces, placed into cash drawers, exposed to moisture, stored in bags, or simply forgotten. Every contact event had the potential to leave another mark. This is why the population of well-preserved survivors is far more important to advanced collectors than the original mintage alone. An old coin with millions originally produced can become genuinely interesting when you encounter a specimen with unusually sharp details and clean, original surfaces. The Denver issue deserves careful attention because the 1925D was produced in a lower quantity than the Philadelphia coin, with a reported mintage of approximately 5.12 million pieces. That figure places the D-mint coin in a different position within the series, but it does not mean every 1925D is automatically a high-priced coin. Condition remains essential. A circulated example with significant wear can be quite different from a sharply preserved specimen. Collectors examining a 1925D will consider the date, mint mark, amount of wear, surface marks, luster, strike, and overall appearance. The D-mint mark should also be inspected carefully because old coins can sometimes be altered or damaged in ways that make a mint mark appear unusual. Never assume that an odd-looking letter automatically represents a rare variety. If a coin appears to have been manipulated, professional authentication becomes especially important. The 1925S is another issue that deserves its own examination. San Francisco produced approximately 5.85 million Mercury dimes dated 1925, a figure roughly comparable to Philadelphia's production. Yet original mintage is only one part of the story. What matters to collectors today is how many examples survive in different grades and how those coins compare with one another. A worn 1925S can be a straightforward collectible, while an unusually well-preserved specimen can become much more interesting. When examining an S-mint coin, study the mint mark itself, the fields surrounding it, and the general quality of the reverse. Look at the fasces, olive branch, lettering, and central bands. On the obverse, inspect Liberty's cap, wing, hair, and facial details. A strong strike and original luster can make an enormous visual difference. The best approach is to examine the entire coin rather than focusing on one feature that happens to look impressive under magnification. Here is where the everyday phrase, excellent condition, becomes complicated. In ordinary conversation, someone may describe a coin as excellent simply because it looks old but attractive. Professional numismatics uses standardized grading categories that are much more precise. A coin can be good, fine, very fine, extremely fine, about uncirculated or mint state, with additional numerical levels used within many categories. The difference between these grades comes from details such as circulation wear, remaining design detail, luster, marks, and surface preservation. On a Mercury dime, the highest points of Liberty's hair and winged cap are particularly useful areas for studying wear. The reverse also provides important clues. If the central details have flattened significantly, the coin has likely experienced substantial circulation. If the design remains crisp and the surfaces show no evidence of circulation friction, the coin may deserve closer consideration as a possible uncirculated specimen. The phrase MS, or mint state, changes the conversation even further. An MS coin is not merely an old coin that looks shiny. It is a coin that has not experienced the type of wear associated with circulation, although it can still have contact marks from the manufacturing, handling, storage, or transportation process. Once a 1925 Mercury dime enters the mint state range, the exact grade can become increasingly important. An MS-55 example and an MS-50 example are not equivalent simply because both are technically uncirculated. The number of marks, strength of luster, strike, eye appeal, and surface quality can separate them. At higher levels, tiny imperfections that would be ignored on a circulated coin can influence the grade. This is why collectors sometimes pay substantial attention to certified MS coins. The grade provides a standardized framework, but the individual coin's appearance still matters. One of the most fascinating characteristics to examine on a Mercury dime is strike quality. A coin can have little actual circulation, wear, and still display areas that appear softer because of the way it was struck. The dies had to transfer a detailed design onto a small silver planchet under enormous pressure, and the resulting sharpness could vary. Collectors therefore inspect the details rather than assuming every weak area represents wear. The wing on Liberty's cap, the hair detail, and especially elements of the reverse fasces can help reveal how strongly the coin was struck. The reverse bands are often watched closely by Mercury dime specialists because strong definition can contribute to the overall desirability of a high-grade example. A coin with excellent preservation but a soft strike can present a different collecting proposition from one with similarly clean surfaces and exceptionally sharp detail. Understanding this difference is one of the steps that separates casual coin searching from serious numismatic examination. Now comes the question that can make a collector's heart beat faster. What if the 1925 dime has an error? Genuine mint errors can be highly interesting, but this subject requires more caution than almost anything else in coin collecting. A real mint error must originate during the manufacturing process. It cannot simply be a scratch, dent, corrosion mark, bent rim, or other damage that occurred after the coin entered circulation. Possible error categories include off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, struck through pieces, die cracks, die breaks, and other production abnormalities. Each type has its own physical characteristics. The key is to determine whether the unusual feature makes sense as something that could have happened inside the mint. If the explanation requires the coin to have been damaged after it left the mint, then it is not a mint error simply because the damage looks unusual. Suppose you discover what looks like doubling around the 1925 date. This is where patience becomes extremely important. A photograph enlarged on a phone can make ordinary die deterioration, machine doubling, scratches, or lighting effects appear like a major double die variety. Genuine die varieties have identifiable characteristics associated with the dies used to strike the coins. Machine doubling can create flat secondary outlines that are not the same thing as hub doubling. A scratch may run across a digit without having anything to do with the original die. Before calling a 1925 Mercury dime a double die coin, examine the feature under controlled lighting and compare it with recognized variety information. If the characteristic appears significant and repeatable, Professional attribution can provide a much stronger conclusion. The rule is simple. Unusual is not automatically rare, and strange-looking is not automatically a variety. A possible clipped planchet creates another mystery. Before a coin was struck, the metal began as sheet material from which blanks were punched. If the cutting process went wrong, a blank could receive an incomplete section along its edge. When that abnormal blank was struck, the finished coin could show a curved or straight area where metal is missing. But here is the problem. Coins can also be damaged after leaving the mint, and post-mint damage can imitate a clip. An authentic clipped planchet generally shows characteristics related to the original blanking process and the way the metal behaved during striking. The edge, rim, and surrounding design must all be examined together. If the metal looks crushed, cut, or manipulated after striking, the explanation may be damage rather than a mint error. This is why authentication is especially important when a supposed error could significantly affect the market value of a 1925 dime. An off-center 1925 Mercury dime would be another feature worth investigating carefully. During a normal strike, the planchet should be positioned correctly between the dies. If it shifts, the design can be struck away from the center, leaving an obvious area of displaced design or blank planchet. The degree of displacement can influence collector interest, but authentication is still essential. A coin with a damaged edge can sometimes appear off-center even though the original strike was perfectly normal. Look for evidence of metal flow, rim formation, and the relationship between the design and the edge. A legitimate striking error usually leaves physical clues that fit a manufacturing event. A later accident tends to leave a different type of evidence. The important thing is not simply finding something unusual, but proving what caused it. Another possibility is a struck-through error, where foreign material or debris interferes with the dies during the striking process. The resulting coin can show missing, weakened, or distorted portions of the design. Die cracks and die breaks can also create distinctive raised features because the die itself develops a crack or failure. These characteristics are different from scratches, which generally cut into the surface after production. Under magnification, the direction and shape of an unusual line can provide clues, but no single observation should be treated as absolute proof. Environmental damage, corrosion, cleaning, and contact with other objects can create confusing appearances. If your 1925 dime seems to show an important mint-made abnormality, photograph it carefully, preserve it in its existing condition, and have the feature examined by someone with appropriate numismatic expertise before making a market claim. Now let's move toward the subject everyone wants to know about. What can a 1925 Mercury dime sell for in the modern market? The honest answer is that there is no single 2026 price. A circulated Philadelphia coin, a circulated D-mint coin, a strong S-mint example, and a certified high-grade specimen can occupy very different price levels. An authenticated error can create an entirely different market category. A top-grade MS coin can attract strong competition when collectors are seeking superior examples for advanced collections or registry sets. But one auction result should never be treated as a guaranteed price for another coin. The exact grade, certification, surfaces, strike, eye appeal, tunning, variety, and auction circumstances all matter. If someone says, a 1925 Mercury dime sold for a huge amount, so yours is worth the same, that is not a reliable valuation method. The correct comparison must match the important characteristics of the specific coin. This is especially important when discussing MS sales. A professionally certified MS 1925 Mercury dime is easier to compare with other certified pieces because its grade has been independently assessed. But even coins carrying the same grade can sell differently. One may have attractive natural tunning, another may have stronger luster, another may have a sharper strike, and another may have distracting contact marks. Collector preference can influence auction competition, especially for exceptional coins. The difference between an ordinary MS example and a standout specimen may therefore be much more complicated than a single number on a grading label. When researching market performance, focus on genuinely comparable examples rather than chasing the biggest headline. A documented sale for a particular grade is evidence about that particular coin. It is not a promise about every 1925 dime. And now, before you put that old dime back into a box, remember this: the tiny details may matter more than the big story printed across the internet. Find the mint mark, study the date, examine the surfaces. Learn the difference between circulated and mint state condition. Look at the strike, instead of judging the coin only by brightness. Investigate unusual features without immediately calling them errors. Never clean a potentially important coin. Never confuse an asking price with a completed sale. And never assume that one dramatic auction result automatically establishes the price of your own specimen. The strongest discoveries are supported by evidence, authentication, grading, and comparable market information. If your 1925 Mercury dime has survived with exceptional detail or displays a genuine mint-made characteristic, that is when the investigation becomes truly exciting. This is ARY Coins News, bringing you another collector alert from the world of classic American coinage. The 1925 Mercury dime may look small, but its story reaches across American history, silver coinage, mint production, circulation, grading, varieties, errors, and the modern numismatic market. If you enjoy discovering what makes old US coins interesting, stay with us and keep examining those collections, inherited coin boxes, old jars, and forgotten albums. Remember, careful research is always stronger than sensational claims, and authentication is the key whenever a coin appears extraordinary. Subscribe to ARY Coins News for fresh collector alerts, classic coin investigations, mint era discoveries, MS-grade discussions, historical stories, and new updates from the numismatic world. Turn on notifications, because the next old coin you uncover may be hiding a detail that deserves an entirely new investigation.